Absolutely perfect. I am recording because why the hell not? This is going to be a slightly different podcast to some of the previous podcasts I've done recently, and it's a really exciting one. And I can't remember what number podcast I'm on. This is number 48. This is an exciting one because when this podcast goes live, a bike will be launched. A bike will be live. And that is a new bike coming from Cervélo. And I've got joining me Phil, who we've done a podcast with previously. And Phil and myself have been speaking about this bike probably, I don't even know how much recently. We've spoke to each other a lot recently.
That's right.
And as I've already mentioned on previous episodes, part of what I do is also an internal podcast for Cervélo. And I was very keen to take Phil's brain and talk about this new bike the day that it goes live. And as you can already see, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to very clearly see the words Áspero 5, early product information, March 2021.
Right.
If you're not watching it on YouTube, you might want to watch this one on YouTube as opposed to listening to it, but we will still talk through it as best as we can and try and explain a bit about this new bike in the best way we can. Phil is probably one of the nicest human beings I've ever had the pleasure to deal with. And I think half of that comes from the fact that Phil is Canadian and has kindly joined, it must be 10 o'clock there?
Yeah, it's coming up on 11. I think this time of year, we're only 5 hours out.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some, we somehow made it work every time we've talked with time zones. Somehow we always seem to make it work. But this, as I said, we're going to be breaking down a bit about this new bike from Cervélo, the Áspero 5, which is an advancement, shall we say, of the Áspero. It's really exciting. It's really a beautiful looking bike. And I know I can't wait to get my hands on one to have a play around on, definitely. Have you had a play around one yet?
Well, funnily enough, I did receive one. I'm fortunate enough to ride a 56, which is the size that we always develop. So I'm fortunate enough to receive early production stuff for, early ride testing, but also we have to spend all that time to do fitment, build instructions, all those kind of things. So it's one of the really kind of nice little corners of my world in Cervélo is that I've been involved in that since I first started. So I do have one. That being said, it's been a different sort of winter than we've had in the past. So I actually haven't spent much time on it yet. So now that we're starting to clear up a little bit, I'll be able to get out. Because I actually live in an area which is really nice. So I live in a little village. I think we've talked about it before, but I go out the door and 1.5 kilometers down the road, I hang a left and I'm in rolling gravel roads for hundreds of kilometers. Just choose your, it's just kind of they just crisscross around the countryside and around we're on the edge of some really interesting kind of geomorphological phenomenon around here. So the glacier kind of came to an end here. So we have these steep rolling contours everywhere around here. So it's really kind of a nice space to have a gravel bike to play around on.
What
just take off for 5 hours on gravel.
What color is your one? Is it white?
No, it's a black one. The white ones that you see are always the ones that they're for testing. We paint them white so when they go into the fatigue machines, we can see if they crack. And then we do some black ones very quickly to get out for testing. So this one I have is black actually.
It's not quite as loud as some of the paint jobs for the bike. There is a black one, of course. There's a black one, but the other two colorways are they're pretty special.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like the black is a really ultralight paint job. That's sort of something that we're kind of moving towards, is always being able to offer that black because it is 80% of the business or whatever. But when it's black now, it's always like a nice light black.
So, I mean, without further ado, I think how we're going to do this one is Phil's going to sort of talk through a bit about a presentation that he's presented to me and probably about 5 million people now. Maybe not 5 million, but maybe 3 million. Anyway, Phil's presented this bike to a lot of people in the industry in preparation for the launch of this bike, and I was really keen to get Phil to talk through this as well as part of one of the 011 podcasts. So, I mean, I'm going to hand over to Phil, and I'm going to just interject at certain points because Phil is definitely the oracle on this one, not me.
You know, I was just thinking too, as we kind of wade into this thing, that, you know, you and I have been chatting a lot over the past, you know, year, right? Like and in some ways, this sort of combination of your podcasts and also the stuff that we've done for Cervélo is a really kind of interesting archaeological document of COVID, because we've watched you move, we've watched light in the day come up and down. Like some days we'd be finishing up and it'd be pitch black in the window behind you, and the light would be coming up here. You know, and kind of we're now at a point where we're kind of equalized a little bit, you know, because of the daylight savings time and whatnot. But eventually, you know, if this continues on, we'll move back in through the summer and we'll see that thing sort of change again. And we've seen our hair grow and go away, and, you know, and all sort of funny things.
It's I started this podcast when lockdown started. The first episode was recorded in Calpe in Spain. Basically locked down in a villa, and I'd been debating doing a podcast for quite a while, and I turned around to my mate George and I was like, let's record a podcast right now, because we had nothing else to do. We weren't allowed to go outside. So that is literally when the first episode started, was when COVID kind of, you know, unfortunately started and happened, and we happened to be in Spain, and we managed to do, I think, 5 days of riding, and then we had to get repatriation flights back to the UK. And
wow.
I was just like, I might as well carry on with this. I really enjoy it. For me, doing the podcast has always been an interesting opportunity to have interesting conversations that are very unstructured, but people seem to enjoy it. And also that led into us doing what we're now doing as well, like for Cervélo, which is it's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. It's kind of a neat opportunity. And, you know, by way of segue, in a lot of ways, this bike is also sort of a COVID product as well, because it was, you know, as you know, we've discussed, this bike was originally supposed to go live late 2020, but due to the sort of global constraints in terms of production and delivery and no airplanes and boats stuck in channels and so on and so forth, it's been a kind of constant moving target for us. So, you know, when we finally were able to lock that April 20th, sorry, is it May 20th now? Date.
You're right, April 20th.
Yeah, it's April 20th, yeah. You know, we actually managed, we gave ourselves the runway we needed, and now bikes are in shops. And there was actually a little blip last week on social media where someone forgot that we had it under embargo and took a picture of the box, and it went out. We had to like shut that down quickly, but it was a nice, you know, that those things are nice. Like they're like little, they just pop out there and people take notice and then they disappear. And it's always kind of a nice opportunity. And, you know, sir, I think anyway, when it's legitimate, when it's not, you know, orchestrated by the brand, you know, when somebody actually doesn't really think about it and just kind of leaks out there. But, you know, ultimately this thing, kind of lives along this path, this same trajectory that we've all been on globally in terms of lockdown and coming out of lockdown and getting it, you know, being allowed to exercise and then having that taken away. And that, you know, because this bike finally comes as the kind of things are opening up a little bit globally, finally launches, which is nice. And, you know, I'll start here. And admittedly, this is just a little bit of fun, but it is telling, and it's more telling than I initially thought it would be when we started looking into this. And this is just a really quick, basic Google Trends trend check that we did in the lead up to this bike. We started to think about being able to bring it to market. You know, some of the, you start playing around with, you look at the market situation, you look at what the competitors are doing, you do all this massive kind of ethnographic study and so on and so forth to figure out, you know, really what the patterns are that are taking place. And this is really cool because as we think about this in the context of being like almost like a bike that's lived alongside COVID with us. there it is on, data driven by Google. I mean, what we're showing is on the horizontal axis is 2017 through 2020, late 2020, when we were watching the sort of evolution of interest in gravel bikes. And this is also for us, this is something that, we talked about with the Áspero when we first launched it. I mean, we were a little late to the game because we tried to understand what it was that we could do that was unique, that we saw as being an opportunity for us to put something into the market that was true to Cervélo, and also, really a bit more focused, in terms of what's been going on out there. So you watch this kind of steady climb in interest in the terms gravel bike and gravel bikes, plural. And then 2020 last year, when people realized that they weren't going to take their family to Chamonix for the winter, or head down to St. Vincent or something, boom, we see this massive increase in interest in those two search terms. It's exponential. And it happens right at that point when globally we were told we weren't allowed to go anywhere to play. This sort of market was building and building and building steadily. And we saw this kind of maturation taking place of the price points, meaning, and that's for us is really a reflection of how dedicated people are to the sport. The early days of gravel, although there was lots of really beautiful bikes being sold from, guys like 3T or Salsa or whomever, the reality was that the average selling price points, especially in North America, were sub $2,000. So that's one of those indicators. We saw this with mountain bike years ago. We saw it with the rise of 105, in the late 90s, where you started to see this building interest, and people were like, well, really, I'm a mountain biker, but I should get a road bike, or, maybe I'm a road guy, but I'll get a mountain bike, or whatever it was. You see that people dip their toe in the water, and then there's a block until they realize how rad it is. And then they bite the bullet and commit, and that's partially, I think, arguably tied to the evolution of the gravel bikes as well. Like, they're getting better. The product, that the ecosystem around gravel is expanding and winning. And so there's a reason now to buy something that's more in keeping with what it is that you love, either in the mountain bike world or in the road bike world. So we see this maturation of the market. We see people spending more. There's more time on gravel bikes. There's more events. I mean, obviously during COVID, a lot of them were canceled, but there's still, if you go up on a site like Gravel Grinder News, and check out the events listing, click on the gravel box, it's still, the Optimism still has 400, 500 registered, gravel fondos, not even taking into account, places like Colorado, where you have weekly gravel series taking place in multiple places, so this thing's happening, and the market is responding. People are more interested in having higher performance gravel bikes. And so at a time when we saw this explosion in the 700C wheel performance road market take place, over the last 12 months, we're talking, to the tune of 100% growth in volume, in anywhere from those kind of entry-level price points at $1,500 USD or whatever, up to the high end. Like, just people are buying road bikes, and that's gravel bikes, cross bikes, road bikes. We see gravel consuming even more of that. So, the growth is sort of 10% on top of the expansion of the market itself. So this idea that gravel's expanding, there's more people committing to it. There are more people interested in buying higher performance gravel bikes, is really what kind of brings us to a point where the Áspero 5 really has a lot of relevance. Cervélo is a brand that tends to be at the upper echelon of performance, and therefore often price points. So when we first launched the Áspero itself, we really paid attention to that, and we sort of constrained ourselves and said, look, we're not going to throw the $10,000 gravel bike into the market yet, because we're not seeing that volume yet. So let's go in where we know we can produce something that's pretty compelling. And it took off for us. It really resonated. And so the Áspero itself became a massive portion of our volume sales globally. And then we'd started this project at the same time, but we just held it back until the right time. So that's kind of what brings us into this bike today is understanding that the world changed in the last 12 months in terms of what people's commitment to gravel riding is. Mm-hmm. It's been an increase, but with that comes all of the upgrades and all of the things that people are doing to kind of improve the performance of that bike.
When did the original Áspero come out?
I want to say it was 18.
Yeah, because I think it was 18 and then 19 was the model version.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it was classed as an MY19, model year 19, but it was a late 18 when it
and then the other bit to also mention on that is, as you're talking about the expansion of events and races. I mean, in the UK, for example, and I told you this the other day, I've entered the British National Gravel Time Trial and the British National Gravel Race. Yeah. Right. It sounds weird saying gravel race. I want to say road race, but it's not. It's gravel race. So, there's a national champs jersey up for both of them up for grabs. So,
is that the BC Duro or is that?
No, it's
a different one.
I've entered the GB Duro as well, and there's Grand Duro as well here, which is in Wales this year. But it's an event that's held in Norfolk, I think it is, and I think it's later on in the year, like September time. But my mate was like, why don't you just enter this just for a bit of a laugh? And I was like, there's a time trial. Why not? It's across the weekend. And you've got a time trial, a race, a relay race as well, and like a Grand Fondo across this weekend.
Right.
I think it's like September time.
Wow.
So there's a growing demand and interest for it. And I think the reason why British cycling have decided to do that is partly because they've seen there's so much more interest in it.
I mean, I think we've probably touched on this before, but, for those of us, who come from the kind of end of the sport that really was driven by racing in our youth, it's a little bit sad to see, but fully understandable. But there's been this global transition between what would be called categorized racing and a transition into Fondo or mass start event. And this is really dictating a lot of what's happening in the sport now. And I think it's positive, don't get me wrong, because the truth is there's more people riding, events, they're riding and then they're also committing to these bigger events. But the days of like lining up as a senior 3 or, 2 or pro or whatever, and they're really dwindling, and that's tied to insurance costs, and it's tied to the change in the public in terms of what the requirements are from a performance cycling experience. But yeah, the Fondo format, the mass start format really fits beautifully gravel as well as paved, or surface, like it's just so much more compelling to get 1,000 people on a line, than it is, a regional categorized race that you end up with 25, senior ones on the line. And
exactly.
It's dwindling, right?
I mean, you and I have talked about it a lot in the past, and the relevance of, say, the Caledonia for that market as well. Like such a relevant bike for that Fondo sort of rider. And in Europe, Fondos are races, like they're treated as races, and you can win them. And there's prize money up for grabs. Like you look at the Mallorca 312, for example, like to win that is a big deal now. And I've got a friend, Rian, who won it a couple of years ago, and he rode off the front of the group. I mean, he is basically a pro. But like there's Fondos are just, I think, as you've already said, the more people cycling effectively, the better. Like it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Give or take what your opinion or anyone's opinions are of Fondos, they open up the opportunity for a bit of a competitive edge and also a bit of fun for a lot of people who maybe don't like the idea of doing crit racing or whatever it is. Like I hate crits. I haven't done a crit. The last time I did a crit, no, I didn't crash in the last crit I did. I was trying to think if I crashed. One of the last crits I did, I was caught up in a pretty bad crash, and it straight away that was like, I'm just not keen for this. not keen for this one. That's why I time trial as well. And that's why I think time trialing is such a good way into the sport, because you're still racing against other people. You know, you can still come first or whatever it is, but effectively you're racing yourself.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's the beauty of the Fondo format, to be perfectly honest. Like when I look at it as a cycling space, it's got an egalitarianism to it that certainly, you know, chasing cycling as a sport, as a categorized sport, doesn't ever have. And I mean, we can argue to blue in the face about whether or not it's a certain constitution that allows themselves to get their heads kicked in every week and keep going back. But you know, the truth is that, you know, that the guy that runs, to my discredit, I don't remember his name, but the guy that set up Grand Fondo New York, he had a really succinct observation about the beauties of the Fondo format. And he's like, look, it's very similar to a marathoning event, but inside of this spectacle, I'm paraphrasing here, but inside the spectacle that is the Fondo, you have multiple kind of dramas playing out. Like you have 15% of the people are there to be the first person over the line.
Yeah.
That's one race. And then in the middle, you have a group of people who are there to have a personal best, to achieve, to succeed. Because they're always, you know, generally speaking, Fondos are not on boring courses. They're always like sort of, you know, really wonderful. They take in the best of the best in the area.
Yeah.
Then you have people who are doing it with their friend for the experience, and maybe they just want to beat their friend, right? And then you have a group of people who are using it as achievement for coming newer to the sport, and they just want to ride 100K on an organized event or 120 kilometers and get a t-shirt, right? And this is all 100% valid, you know, and that's what you get out of that experience with Fondos that you don't get out of categorized racing, is the opportunity to find the experience that you need inside that format, you know, and it translates beautifully to gravel.
Completely agree. Yeah. It's great to see that market is growing so much as well. As we've already sort of said, ultimately, the more people cycling, the better it is for everyone, quite frankly.
Yeah, for sure.
That, definitely. Anyway, we could talk about that for probably about
yeah, so anyway, so this is kind of where we're at with the launch of the Aspero 5 is really this bike comes into being at a time when, you know, quite frankly, there's opportunity for it to find homes that are, you know, that it requires. People are looking for those opportunities for higher performance gravel, and the Aspero 5 comes to meet that, because that was always, you know, keep in mind that with the Aspero, you know, understanding when you look at a great idea is just, if you wander through the world of gravel bike advertising and you see everything from people with all the bags going bike packing to hitting jumps to having urban experience, you know, to doing an event like Kanza, or, you know, or you see people riding single track or whatever. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's one of the most beautiful things about gravel, is it's ultimately defined by just being other to whatever the pave is, the pavement in your region. So it's so diverse, but at the same time, understanding that, you know, what section of that are you looking to be part of? Like, are you looking to build a bike for hitting jumps on with drop bars? Are you looking for a bike that's really maneuverable through tight single track in the forest? Are you looking for, you know, a bike that you can do wheelies on and skids and go for coffee, or whatever it is? You know, Cervélo chose to build what we called a speed performance gravel bike, like an event bike. It's what we know how to do, and that's kind of our gateway into it, was look for opportunities to improve the performance in, you know, fast gravel environments. And I think, you know, let me see if I can get this thing to. So, you know, we launched with the sort of tongue-in-cheek statement, you know, haul ass, not cargo. And that was about that. That was, you know, just us kind of going, look, do what you want with this bike. That's the beauty of gravel. In a lot of ways, it's just the ultimate and sort of egalitarianism opportunities to ride a drop bar bike, right? You can ride it on dirt, you can ride it on pavement, you can ride it in the forest, you can do so many terrains and surfaces with a gravel bike. They're so versatile. But, you know, like what we built was a bike to go fast on. And if you want to go bike packing on it, knock your socks off. But the truth is that it's really more suited from a performance perspective to an event or going fast on gravel than it is putting all the bags on and going touring, you know? And we did that purposefully. We did it so that people understood right away what it was that we built. And also it gives us that opportunity if someone's going to test it, you know, as a bike to go bike packing on and come back and say, this thing's, you know, it's too stiff, it's whatever it is. We can say, yeah, but that's what we engineered. We wanted to tell people what it was that we built. And so, you know, as just kind of a fun thing, you know, the idea with the Aspero 5 is to haul more ass, which I don't even know what that means, but it's just kind of like more of the fast stuff and you know,
it sounds good. It sounds
good. Of the bags. Yeah, it's just kind of fun. Yeah,
I love this photo as well. It's a photo that has come up so much in like the Aspero press packs and everything, and I just think it's such a great photo. And I think a lot of it is this guy that's on it looks like a mate of mine who is, I've mentioned to you before, the guy that's a chef for EF. Looks like him.
Right.
It's not him, but because my mate's got tattoos and stuff, but they look so similar.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what they captured really nicely with that campaign, was just how much fun it is to just go fast on gravel.
Yeah. Exactly.
We use a group called Cut Media based out of Glasgow to do a lot of those things. And they understand cycling. You know, they've made some beautiful videos for us. The guys are great. And they understood that transition we wanted between the kind of serious work that we did with our series, for example, you know, which is still one of the most beautiful cycling intro videos ever made. But then they understood what it was we were trying to do with gravel. Gravel's fun. It's not a barfathon like training, doing 15 minutes at 350 4 times a workout, right? So
let's not think about that session again. Let's not recall that one. In the past, my weekend was horrible.
So here's what we did, you know, just kind of jump into the bike itself. We had identified right away, you know, what the differences were between a 5 series Aspero and what we call a series level Aspero would be. So the Aspero launched specifically as a named bike, as opposed to an alphanumeric bike, the way we'd usually done that. And that was something that we did quietly, and a lot of people kind of scratched their heads. But the reality was that what we'd identified was that our alphanumeric bikes were really tied to that kind of core performance stuff that Cervélo was famous for. You know, aero road, lightweight, stiff projects, time trial or triathlon bikes. And the Aspero and gravel sat in a different place, you know, because they do have an element of experience and fun and variability, and that those other bikes maybe don't present, you know, in terms of their use case or in terms of their personalities. So we transitioned into calling it just an Aspero, you know, and get away from an alphanumeric title. However, inside of Cervélo, 5 always represents, you know, the most we can do. We've had Project California, we've had P5X, which were like, you know, F1 factory stuff. But generally speaking, 5 level represents the kind of pinnacle of what we're able to do with that product. And it's always going to move a little bit. But so we launched with the series level Aspero, knowing that we had opportunity with a 5 level product. So that's where Aspero 5 comes in. It's not often, it's not A5. It is actually Aspero 5. And what we did was we started out by getting 10% of the weight out of the frame itself, which is pretty substantial when that bike was already sitting at, you know, just around 1,100 grams. So now we're hovering around that kilo mark with paint and metal parts on it. So that's when you get into that bike that starts to feel light, you know, when you have the same stiffness numbers, but the bike weight is coming down. That's when you get that kind of liveliness to it. You realize you're on something that's moving a little faster. I mean, 1,100 grams, don't get me wrong. When we started this discussion, you know, years ago, you know, I joined Cervélo in 2011. And in those days, you know, we were shooting for sub-kilo on our bikes. I mean, our 3s and our 5s were under that. And certainly an R5 CA was 700 grams at that point, you know, but there was really kind of like, you had to do a lot of work to get the bikes sub-kilo. And now we're at that point where we can do that. We've designed some shapes that have so much structure in them that we're really kind of talking about making sure that layup is doing the work it needs to do, as opposed to providing more structure to it. So drop 10% out of the frame weight, so it comes down to that kind of kilo mark, and that's, as I say, painted 56 with metal parts on it. And the other thing we did was we concealed the cables, and what that does immediately is improve aerodynamics by a huge amount. It's amazing how messy control cables are when they're out in the wind. So this bike is actually 32 grams faster than the previous Aspero. And so that translates into about 4 watts when it's done. So you can argue that there's variability involved in wheel performance and tire size and those sort of things, which are totally legitimate. Mm-hmm. There's some magic numbers around aerodynamics on wheels and how the tire and wheel interfaces. And if you have knobbies on the side of a tire, clearly it's gonna screw up the aero. But the point is that, like, when you're out by yourself on some wide open gravel road ripping along, aerodynamic savings are substantial. Like they start to matter. The other thing that's really nice. What's that? Sorry,
I was reading in the press pack and everything that it's really eloquently written, which is talking about when you're riding a peloton with 200 other people, aero matters, but not quite the same as when you're riding on your own in the middle of nowhere on a gravel trail. I just thought, yep, that pretty much sums it up. Oh, it's like with a headwind blowing in your face and stuff. I was like, yeah, I get it. I understand the point of why aero is still a relevant factor on a gravel bike.
Yeah, absolutely. And
how often how often are you out on a gravel ride with loads of other people?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you think about where you live, for example, you'll be on the moor, with the wind blowing across it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's validity to it. Now, stick a handlebar bag on it and you're, things are changing again. So anyway, point being that all things being equal, it got faster through the concealment of the cables, and also the use of our bar. It's an aero bar as well. Now, some nice things about that too are that if you are riding in sort of tight single track areas, there's kind of less hose out there to hang up on stuff. And then if you are choosing to ride a handlebar bag, as most people know who have been riding one recently, that bag pushes on the hoses and they abrade the paint on the head tube. And so you've got this kind of like messy cabling situation, especially if it has external mechanical cables as well. So you've got this kind of mess that you're dealing with that bag on board. And a lot of people choose to ride with that bag. So, excuse me, it's just it's kind of a really premium change. When we look at a high-end road bike now, the expectation is that there's no cables kind of out in the wind, and so we carry that over. And there's some interesting externalities, which are, it's tidier for a handlebar bag, it improves the aerodynamics substantially, and it just looks way cleaner than it does when you have hoses kind of hanging out in the breeze as well.
And I think one of the things to point out is, obviously we know that the SRAM group sets are wireless effectively, but still if you're running GRX Di2, you all the cables are still hidden, like it's still gone.
Correct.
And
yeah, that's right.
Super clean and super tidy. And this is one of the amazing paint jobs on the bike. Only one of them.
We'll get there. Yeah, they're pretty special actually.
Yeah.
A bunch of stuff comes back. A few of the features that were designed for Aspero, show up again on this bike for good reason. The down tube projection is one of them. I mean, the down tube projection, we use kind of a polymer bonded onto that face of the down tube so that you don't get stone chips or stone damage to the tubes themselves. Mm-hmm. Suggested a couple minutes ago, one of the things that took place when we were developing the old R series bikes, the R series bikes, was this transition of what we called Squoval 2 into Squoval Max. And Squoval Max is that tube library that we're using on Caledonia, R series, R5, and Aspero and Aspero 5 now. And what that was we took the opportunity to figure out how the shape would provide as much structure as we could possibly have inside the constraints of UCI.
Mm.
That way you don't have to rely on the layup to do that work. So, if you have a skinny tube and you want the stiffness out of it, like you have a 1-inch round carbon tube, for example, and you want the stiffness out of it, we're getting out of contemporary, performance carbon bikes now. The wall thickness has to be so thick in that the weight is so high.
Mm.
So fundamentally, what Squoval Max is all about is making sure that we can get as much material away from the center of the tube set as we possibly can. So the center of anything, requires the least amount of material or the least amount of force to bend it. Mm. This was a discussion we had with Squoval years ago. So the more material you can get farther away from that, called the central axis, the stiffer the thing is inherently. And that's because it just takes more force basically to deform the frame wall than it would if it's closer to that neutral axis in the center of the tube. So Squoval really exploits those Squoval Max really exploits those opportunities. And that's why that down tube is so massive, because we're basically holding all the structure on the bike in the down tube, because the down tube supports the bottom bracket and it supports the head tube, right? Whereas the top tube is tied to torsional stiffness on the bike. But if you have too much stiffness in the top tube, then the bike gets too poundy on your hands and there's too much vibration moving through the rider. So we can manipulate the top tube size to control vibration management as well. This is all the ride quality story that we've been sort of focused on for the last few years. Mm-hmm. So that lower giant Squoval Max down tube is really a beam. So the problem is that if we increase the wall thickness on that to resist stone damage, the stiffness gets too high. So that's why we include that protection on it, is so that we can control the stiffness of the bike without making it so fragile that every stone that comes off the front wheel is going to damage it. So that stays in place. Hmm. The other thing is the recessed plate for the top tube mounts. And we did that because not everyone wants to ride a top tube bag for storage. A lot of people ride a handlebar bag, as we mentioned previously. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. It's storage volume for one. It's also, often top tube storage. If you're climbing, standing, people hit their knees on it. They don't like that necessarily. So if you're not going to run that top tube storage, it's nice to have a nice flush line instead of having the two bolt heads sticking out of the top tube, which are ugly, but also, if you end up sliding up the top tube at all, they're reasonably uncomfortable. So that comes back into play. Nice little blanky plug, just gets it nice and flush, a little cleaner. Mm. And also we kept the trail mix in place. And this was one of the defining features of the Áspero, I would say. And this was the idea that because regional gravel riding is defined by tires, or tire size is defined by regional gravel, depending on what part of that is. There's areas where people are running a 650B tire, by 50 millimeters. Other places they're riding a 700 by 33 millimeter tire, which those two tires have about the same outer diameter, which is about 680 millimeters, give or take some sag and tire manufacturer, whatever, but give or take about 680 millimeter OD. And then if you're running those sort of 743, 740 sizes, then that's like a 715 millimeter OD tire. So you have this change in tires that's substantial enough that if you are going to swap between the two, then it changes the handling of the bike. And we didn't want to do that. We designed the bike internally to have 62 millimeters of trail because that's the way we wanted the bike to handle. Again, that ties to that concept of ride quality, which is ride quality is the way we as individuals experience each individual bike. And it's really a mix of handling, stiffness, and materials, right? So materials are like, carbon fiber, but tube shapes, where the bond joints are, layout, that's all vibration management and stiffness management. And stiffness and handling are married together, So a bike that's too stiff doesn't sit well on uneven pavement. It sort of bounces around, but too low a stiffness, and then you impact steering control and also reaction to rider inputs, pedal accelerations, or bracing loads in hard turns, or whatever it is. So 62 millimeters of trail is how we designed the bike. And what we wanted to do was give people the opportunity to keep that bike, regardless of whether they were riding a big tire or a small tire. So when we first started talking about that, we were very clear on the 62 millimeter thing. But now that bikes lived in the world a little bit, what we found is people are actually just using it to manage how they want that bike to handle. It's more of a customization tool. It moves the axle rearward by 5 millimeters if you flip that insert around.
Yep.
So what that does is adjust that trail back to 62 millimeters if you're running that sort of 680 millimeter OD tire, right? So what's cool is that what that also gives you the chance to do is customize how you have the bike, how you want the bike to handle based on what your tire size is. So I think you and I have talked about this before, and you're doing a really cool thing, which is like you're riding a 650B on Sparrow, but you've got it in the front position, in the forward 5 millimeter position. Correct. So what you're doing, I think about the bikes you use. You've got a P-Series bike, you've got an R5, you've got a fleet of S5s in various versions. And so what you've done effectively is you've moved that bike, that wheel forward to that 680 millimeter tire, the smaller tires in the front position. So you've shortened the trail to about 60 millimeters. So it's more in keeping with that kind of road handling that you enjoy. The thing that we're hearing is if you leave that larger tire, the 715 tire, in that 5 mil backwards position, the trail goes out to about 67 mil. And we're hearing of people in areas where they either come from mountain biking or there's much more technical riding and stability required, then that gives them that little bit more trail that they need to stabilize the bike in those kind of situations. One of the things that is bubbling to the surface in the UK, especially actually, is where we're hearing about this, usually at the front end of some curve like this, is that if you leave the chip in the forward facing position and you have two sets of wheels, you got maybe a 740 or whatever it is, a 700 by 40C. If you also have the second set of wheels with road tires, like a 28 or a 30 on it, you just swap the wheels out, you're moving the bike between the 62 mil trail, give or take whatever that tire size is, and then you're dropping down to, much like you're doing, that sort of 57 mil trail, which you find on an R series bike. And because of the stiffness profile on this bike and the handling profile on it, once you change down to that sort of shorter trail number, like 57, you've basically got a bike that handles like a road bike. And so we're hearing about those people that are keeping one bike and they're moving their tires in and out of, or their wheels in and out based on what that day's riding is like. And that's a really neat thing. The stiffness profile of this bike is about the same as an R3 Mud, which is a bike we built for the pros a bunch of years ago. And it won Paris-Roubaix twice. So it's a pro level stiffness, which we did specifically because we needed to offset potentially negative inputs from having lower pressure in tires. So super high stiffness, but we knew that if we went too low, then the bike would start to feel really soggy. So we used that same stiffness profile from R3 Mud, mated with those kind of softer, lower pressure tires so that you get that high performance kind of handling out of it without getting beaten to death.
I still think the Aspero with road wheels and road tires on handles and feels as good as any road bike I've ridden as well. Like,
well, you did the trenching challenge on it, right?
Yeah, I did a trenching challenge on it, and so I rode up and down the same freaking hill 91 times, and and we talked quite a lot about it, about what bike to use, and people who are listening to this will slowly start to realize more and more that Phil is my go-to for technical stuff on Cervélos almost, I reckon, probably every couple of weeks. I've got something that I'm asking you that I'm trying to do or thinking about doing. And with the trenching challenge, I was like, look, I'm thinking about doing it on the Aspero because the gear ratios are good for it. I find it a really comfortable bike. I love the shape of the GRX Ti2 shifters. Like, ergonomically, they just work so well for me. And I'm just going to put a set of road tires on it, road wheels on it. What do you think? And you were like, as long as they're big tires, it will be awesome. That's basically what you said to me. Yeah. And it was perfect. Really, really good.
Yeah. And we always, the the reality is you don't want to get like down on 25s or anything and go racing on it, because it's quite a low bottom bracket on this bike, right? So there's where there's sort of, you start to think about the trade-offs in ride quality. And, you know, one of the things is when you lower the bottom bracket on a bike, you improve the stability, really, it's profound. It doesn't take much to feel the change. So on a bike like an Aspero that has these massive tires on it as well, we have the opportunity to drive that bottom bracket even lower. Because if you don't, you've got high standover heights as well, which maybe don't impact, people riding our size, but certainly on the 48s and 51s.
Yeah, of course.
A traditional road platform with a 68 mil bottom bracket drop and stick a set of 43 mil tires on it. That bike has grown, massively. So drop the bottom bracket to improve stability, but also improve the standover heights. But the trade-off is, like, you don't want to go racing a Criterium on this bike. You got to tap the pedals on the corners every time.
I have heard a story of someone that has, though.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, years ago.
I don't know how he did. But I've heard that there's a guy that has in London, ironically.
There's probably some trade-off. Like, I haven't done the math yet, but if you've got a 30 millimeter tire, on this bike, and it may be enough to offset a few millimeters of bottom bracket drop. Certainly the days of 68 millimeter bottom bracket drops came around in the days of 21 millimeter tubulars, right? And quill pedals. So our tires are getting taller, our pedals are getting lower profile. So there's no reason to kind of continually chase that number, but there's got to be a tipping point where if this bike with a set of 25s on it, I think you'd be leaving the back plates in the corners quite often.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
As long as it's not a technical circuit and you're not, you're not heading around a corner, could be doable. I'm not going to do it. I won't tell you. I'm not going to do it.
Right. And it's funny. It's such a funny analogy, that pedaling through a corner thing, but it's really become, for me, in the past sort of 3 years, maybe, one of the considerations, and a really good, for me, understanding geometry on a bike and what geometry is tuned for.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the ones that for me is a go-to. Like, thinking about, what am I going to do with this bike? Am I ever going to pedal through a corner at 50 k an hour? No. Okay. Drop the bottom bracket. Bikes like Asperos and Caledonias are another good example of that, where, one of the differences between something like an S5 and a Caledonia 5 is stability. And that stability comes from lowering that BV on the Caledonia, because it's not a bike that you would go race a crit on. It's perfect for Fondo use, ride all day, every day. It's not a performance difference. It's a use case difference.
Exactly.
Exactly. You're not going to lean this bike over at those kind of angles and pedal through a corner at those kind of speeds on gravel, because it ain't going to stick.
See all these people wipe it out.
Just sliding out. Yeah.
What did you do?
And to this day, I'll be honest, there's nothing I hate more than watching a bike crash.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's awful. When you see those reels on YouTube where they've compiled all the crashes, I think it's awful. I can't watch it.
Yeah.
People get hurt. So anyway.
Gives me gutters, that does.
All right. The other thing that we're doing with this is it is a removable front derailleur clamp or a replaceable front derailleur clamp, depending on which condition you're coming from. And we offer a blanking plug. And the reason for that is, again, it's just detail. It's just about, like, if you are going to turn this bike into a one-by bike, or buy the one that's a one-by bike, it doesn't look like it was supposed to be a two-by bike. You don't have people are stuck and riveted in place to look at every day and wonder whether you're going to catch your leg on those. So it's kind of a nice option. And, this is interesting too, because it means that, and we're here, this is one of the things that, we can't be all things to all people. We're a small brand. So one of the commitments we've made with the Aspero 5 is to really work with the drivetrain manufacturers to leverage their technologies. So the bikes that are SRAM bikes will ship 1x, and the bikes that are Shimano ship 2x. So we hear this all the time, that inevitably you have a SRAM customer who wants a 2x bike, or a Shimano customer who wants a 1x bike. So just being able to actually already have the derailleur in place, you can just put the clamp on and turn it into a 2x bike. It's just kind of a nice detail. It means you're getting something that was planned.
Have you seen the Lauf? We've talked about Lauf off recordings before.
Yeah.
Lauf have done a beer bottle opener thing which you can put there. I saw it. That's a pretty good way of doing it.
They're for Cervélos?
It would work on a Cervélo.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly. I saw it and I was like, yeah, it's kind of down with that.
Maybe that's one of the, everyone's building sort of accessory mounts for the bottom of the computer stand and whatnot. Maybe one of them should just be an opener.
Yeah, it would. I mean, surely that's a better location to do it than going down by your dirty old crankset if you've been out on a nice muddy ride as opposed to a dusty one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Nice.
I'll touch on this. This is BB Right is something that Cervélo started using in 2011, give or take 2010. I'll just reiterate what BB Right is all about. BB Right is not a crank standard. It's not a bottom bracket standard. It's a frame design, right? And all it is that we're looking for opportunities to make a bike lighter and stronger. I like to, think about the word strong, because anyone can make a bike light. They can even make it light and stiff. But if it's not strong, then it's not safe, right? And so one of the things that Cervélo has always been concerned with is strength above all else. Now, once you have strength, you can spend it, right? Strength can translate into a number of different opportunities as long as it remains strong. Like if you have too much strength, then you can trim that out to get the weight down, or you can leave it to get stiffness. It's kind of, you can do what you want with it. So by having strength built in to tube shapes like Squobomax, the opportunities are there to build a bike that's lighter, stiffer, but stronger. And so all BB Right is if you think about the progression of bottom brackets, ground zero is BSA, and that's a 68 millimeter bottom bracket shell standard. And as the years have progressed, BSA means 68 millimeter bottom bracket shell, and then you thread an 11 millimeter bearing cup into either side. Right? Mm-hmm. That gives you 90 millimeters, and that's where the bearing faces are. They're at 90 mil. Okay. So all BB Right is we took that 11 millimeters where you'd usually thread a cup in, and we used it for real estate of the down tube, the seat tube, and the chainstay. So we've got a bigger chainstay, bigger seat tube, bigger down tube, which means it's stronger, stiffer, with no weight penalty. Mm. So BB Right has had some controversy over the years because of the press fit standard, not because it's BB Right. And this is one of the things you can pick and choose your videos, right? Yeah. By people who have something to sell you. But the truth is that when we launched, we made a transition to the way we do press fit since some of the controversy sort of bubbled to the surface about creaking. And the creaking thing comes from not being able to co-mold or circle. When the bike goes through a heating and cooling process, so if you're trying to have a circle, to press a cup into, and you've heated and cooled it and heated and cooled it, it's never going to stay round. So this is a press fit problem across the board. We solved it by making a shell, an internal shell, outside the bike. So we actually build our bike, and then on a steel, independently on a steel mandrel, we build a shell. That shell gets then bonded into the frame before the back end goes on the bike. Mm-hmm. So we put a shell in so we know it's round. And then we actually locate the back end off the shell itself to square things up. Mm-hmm. So we're doing all that stuff to make sure we don't have creaking in the bike now. And it's one of those things that, press fit standard, regardless of how good the hole is that's round, like any bottom bracket that's existed in history, it does require service every once in a while. Now, they've got aluminum cups, they've got dowel ring cups, they've got all these different versions. So if you leave it in your bike for 3 years, it's probably going to start creaking. It's probably going to need a bit of grease. But generally speaking, our creak problems went away once we started doing this. And the funny thing about things like bottom bracket creaking is they're only a problem when they're creaking. And when they go away, people don't think about them because there's an expectation that there's no issue.
Yeah.
There's a number of things on a bike that are like that. And there's a number of things in our lives that are like that. When they are going wrong, they are nothing but an annoyance. When they're acting to expectation, they don't exist. Mm. And that's one of the things over the years that's with BB Wright that's happened, is it went away. And we went back specifically to stores who were having, really reporting problems, and it had been all but forgotten. So it's successful. We don't get the claims we got years ago with creaking bikes, because it's not an issue.
The other thing to mention is 9 times out of 10, it isn't a bottom bracket.
There's lots of places to creak on a bike. And when you have giant carbon tubes, you're riding a guitar. So, it can sound like a bottom bracket issue, but it might be a pedal or a handlebar.
I had my recent one that I found was I just needed to grease the through axles. That's it.
Exactly.
And that's a really common one. And it's one of those situations where I've gone, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. And that was putting the TT bike on turbo trainer. I was like, oh, it's a bit creaky. But my head was thinking, it's probably just a bit creaky because of the fact that I'm putting a lot of power down. I'm going to stop, take the skewers out, grease them up, whack them back in, completely gone. Or it could even be as simple as a bolt being slightly undone. Or the other one that I've had in the past is spokes rubbing. Mm-hmm. And so never, I mean, one thing to say is never straight away go, oh, it's definitely the bottom bracket. It could be so many other things. And it's just a case of like trying to find it. Pedals is a super common one as well.
Yeah, very much.
I've noticed it with my partner was using Look mountain bike pedals. Oh my God. I like what Look do. I love Look's products, and I don't use Look pedals, but I've always liked the brand. The mountain bike pedals, my God, so much noise coming out of them. I took them off.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I noticed after, I'm a dinosaur in this industry, but there's a transition to how tight people are putting pedals on now.
Yeah.
And often they're under tightened and not greased. So, over the years that where I've been at a, multi-service event or I'm in a shop and they're saying it's creaking, the first thing I do is tighten the pedals because I'm old. And, inevitably it goes away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They used to make pedal wrenches this big for a reason.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's BB Wright. So BB Wright is 11 millimeters, stolen, borrowed, colonized on the non-drive side, so we can get strength without added weight. And then there's bearing sits outboard on the drive side now. Initially, what we did was we had an 11 millimeter spacer, which still works if you want to use a press fit cup style, like the SRAM ones, for example, or the rotor ones where the bearings are always inboard, standard press fit. Then you just put an 11 millimeter spacer, and that puts the crank out. But now that we're using all the kind of coupled the connect bottom brackets, all the coupled together ones, we factored in that 11 millimeter space, so the bearing does sit outboard of the bike, and it's supported, so that everything fits in and puts it back at 90 millimeters between bearing faces.
Whatever is the bottom bracket that is in my R3, which is whatever that bike came shipped with, the bottom bracket in that is so good. I don't know what it is, but it's it just spins like mad.
Yeah, those are what we call connect ones, the ones that are threaded together in the middle. They add a little bit of weight, but it's worth it because the problem, they just go away. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's time to, their bearings. And
wear out.
And, yeah, for sure. A couple of interesting things about BB Wright, which certainly were not planned prior when it was designed, but ended up being kind of nice future-proofing. And that's that we had so much structure in that stay that when we transitioned to disc brakes, we didn't have to add a bunch of reinforcement to it because we already had the strength. Disc brakes are violent, right? Like they, think back to the early days of mountain bikes where people put disc brakes on and tear the chainstays off, or because it's just so much torque. Well, the BB Wright had that already built into it. It was strong enough. And the other thing is that it's the Sparrow and the Sparrow 5 ended up being some of the few of the mountain gravel bikes, that are on the market that accept a non-drive side power meter. Because people are pushing the boundary on that chainstay size for tire clearance, often that outer surface of the chainstay gets pushed out a little bit too far, to allow a 4 eyes or stages style power meter to work, whereas BB Right does. So we're hearing anecdotally that people who are going in to buy a gravel bike and they're power riders, and you know, like there's more of them now, right? Because of Zwift and Peloton, more people are looking for that sort of quantification of effort through a number that they've been given through alternative sources. Power meters are starting to matter more, and they're starting to, another reason to choose an Aspero or Aspero 5 over this is because you have that opportunity to put power meter on, whether you got a stages that on a different bike or something like that. So it's kind of a nice, you know, positive outcome of BB Right as well, is the structure is there. So we didn't have to kind of take that space over between the crank and the outer face as well.
Yeah, I'm running on my Aspero Dura-Ace, Shimano Dura-Ace power meter, which similarly has the pod on the back like
right.
stages or 4i, whatever it is. It's, I'll be honest, it's close, but there is more than ample room for it.
Yeah, I had a discussion at, so traditionally with 4 eyes, for example, in discussions I've had with them recently, if you ordered a 4 eyes power meter off the shelf, like they have 2 versions, they have factory installed and ready to ride. Yeah. It's similar stages. That pod sits at about 80 millimeters from the crank center. Whereas what they're doing, it clears, you can do it. It gives you about a millimeter, give or take, of space. And in their calculations, because of its proximity to the bottom bracket shell and where flex is really going to happen in that series of springs, which is like tire, wheel, chainstay, you know, they're pretty confident that a millimeter is enough. Now, if you're riding gravel and you've only got a millimeter, then there's a pretty good chance you might muck it up a bit and scrape the paint, but functionally it's fine. When they mount them, like if you order a 4 eyes power meter and tell them you have a Cervélo, they'll mount it at 120 millimeters from that center, and that gives you tons of room to clear. But I have a Dura-Ace meter as well, and on my S5, and that pod's pretty close, but never had a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
What else is going on? Oh yeah, so Aspero 5 is delivered as an electronic bike only. We're really, the opportunities for electronic are growing in popularity. Also, they're getting broader. I mean, the release of SRAM's rival electronic group set 3 days ago is a game changer. Like opening price point electronic, wow, that is a really compelling option. So less and less at that kind of elite level is there a requirement to run mechanical. Although some people like mechanical, and that's fine. I mean, it's beautiful. Like an Ultegra mechanical group set is still, you know, one of the most beautiful things, you know, when the cables are new. So if you are going to build this bike as a mechanical bike, then the cables run in the traditional way outside the bike. Mm-hmm. So the hose will still run through the frame, but the hoses, the controls themselves, the derailleur controls run externally. And also dropper posts would run externally as well. Which, you know, considering the amount of service required on cables and housing in a gravel environment, it's just ease of service as much it is ease of design.
Mm-hmm.
The bike, just same as the last one, has tons of tire room on it. It's got 53 millimeters of space for a 700C. So we call it the space available, the tire size. And so we've got 53 millimeters of space. For ISO testing, we're required to supply a bike with 4 millimeters per side of the tire clearance. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about like a 45 millimeter tire, give or take. Off the record, fill the space. I mean, if it rubs the frame and you haven't left 4 millimeters, then unfortunately that's your choice, but you're restricted to whatever will pass through that frame.
Yeah, of course.
They're destroying. I mean, obviously, with a knobby tire and dirt, we highly recommend you give yourself that much room, 4 millimeters, so you don't just tear the frame to shreds with grit. You do have 53 millimeters to play with.
I mean, you're still getting massive tires in that, you know.
45 millimeter tires are big. Make no mistake. And then at the 650B, you've got room for up to that 51 millimeter tire we're talking about, and that gives you that 4 millimeters per side as well. So loads of tire space. And then what we've done is we've employed the same steer tube and stem system that we developed originally for the Caledonia, which is that sort of C-shaped steer that gives us a channel at the front of the steer tube to run the hoses down. And so what that means is it passes through the center of the bearing, the upper bearing, so you don't have steering input from the hose tension, right? And then once it clears that bearing, it's free inside the frame. And that gives you opportunity, A, for really free steer. You don't have impediment from the hoses themselves running, but also if you are someone who travels with your bike and you want to pack it and take it apart and pop the stem on and off and that sort of stuff, it gives you enough room inside the system to have the slack to be able to do that. You know, if you run those hoses too tight, then it's really difficult you got to undo the caliper on the front wheel, let that so it can travel, you know, up the frame, so you can get the stem off, right? But with this system, gives you enough room inside that head tube, down tube junction to have some extra hose floating around, so it's just easier to disassemble completely.
And I've seen many times from people who travel with their bikes who have fully integrated setups saying this is a serious problem with traveling with a bike. If you're using like you know, these hard shell cases where you do need to take off your handlebars and take everything off the bike, it's definitely an issue.
It is.
Go on.
Yeah, and it is one of the sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. It is one of the challenges for sure of this kind of new normal of you know, internally routed cables and disc brakes and so on, is those requirements have changed, and I suspect in time we'll see a transition in more, you know, Seacon's got that bag that you leave the handlebars on.
Yeah, that's what I use. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
Yeah, I've traveled with it internationally as well many times, and they work pretty well. But you know, yeah, for those where you need to pop it all apart, it's a bit of a problem, and that's just something to pay attention to at the assembly level. And when we call out, when we supply an assembly manual with every bike we build that has step-by-step instructions, and every one of them explains inside, leave a few extra spacers at the point of routing the hoses, so that once you get the fit established, you can take those spacers out and push the stem down, and the frame will absorb X number of centimeters of extra hose. And it's important for everyone to know, because, you know, if you do get that situation where somebody's assembled it, you know, they've put the stem flat because it looks cool on the floor, and then they've routed the hoses directly to it, you know, and haven't left any slack in the system, then getting that stem off is really difficult on any bike with internally routed cables. Something we realized with S5, S3, you know, and then Caledonia and Aspero 5 now is just make sure that you have room in there. The bike ships with the ST32 alloy stem. And the reason we did that was specifically because it is a stem that was designed to be symmetrical, so it looks a little bit better if it's flipped. It is compatible, however, with the carbon version, which was done on the Caledonia. So it's kind of a nice upgrade opportunity if you really want to sort of Gucci it up and take a little bit of weight out, flip over that carbon stem, and it's pretty Gucci.
Pretty Gucci. That's such a good description. I'm a huge advocate for carbon handlebars, but I don't think any of my bikes, apart from S5, actually, I don't really think I have carbon stems on anything.
Right.
But apart from, yeah, as I say, the S5s, but everything else is alloy stems. And I think purely it's been a case because where I've been like working out and refining my fit over time, working with Tim as well, where you can, like, alloy stems, they're just, you can pick them up so cheap now, like pretty good ones. Yes. So it's just like, we'll just shove that on, see how it goes. But as you say, the Gucci factor of a carbon stem is pretty tasty at the end of the day.
Yeah, they look really nice. The graphics on them are pretty sexy. But you're right about alloy stems. I mean, the alloy stems there's some nice light alloy stems on the market now. There's carbon has a different vibration transfer tone, and just it's kind of a nice upgrade, and obviously a little bit lighter, than the alloy stuff as well. What else is going on? Okay, we're also shipping. These have started showing up on most of our bikes, but we'll just hit it. We sort of rethought the integration stuff. as a lot of brands are doing now, and a lot of stem manufacturers. So we're supplying every bike with a sort of modular accessory mount program. So it comes with the computer mount, pucks for Wahoo and Garmin. And then also, I'm just noticing that this doesn't show this is the same picture twice. That's funny, it changed. The other thing it does, oh no, it's not. I'm sorry, you can see it on the second picture.
The underside.
You can see the lobes for the GoPro style mount.
Yeah.
So you can have that on or not. And so a lot of lights now obviously are using that mounting system. And so it just gives you the opportunity to have that really slick integration of that. And then also for the rear clamp mechanism on the saddle, that same thing is available. So that same mounting profile. So you can run that. If you don't want it, you just spin it around, it just disappears. You don't see it at all. Right. So it just means that you've got those opportunities to seamlessly kind of integrate computers and lighting.
Just looks so much more tidy, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
It's slick. We're all using them, might as well have a place to hold them.
Yeah, exactly. Completely agree. It's nice that it's all included with them as well. And this is the same sort of stem that's being used in the Caledonia as well.
Correct. Yeah. And you'll see this system there's different versions of it that have been rolling out. S5, S series, Caledonia, P5, all use this sort of same series of little bits and pieces that sort of go together to build it out.
Nice. It's cool.
And then, keeping in what's going on with gravel and the fact that we've got a handlebar design that people tend to like and we care about. We did do a flared version, a gravel version of this bar. So similar to the bar that we have on the Caledonia now, which was originally designed for the S-Series bike. It's like a semi-aero bar. So nice flat top on it. Not so big like the S5 or the ABO4 prior to it, but a nice little smaller shape. Big deep channel cut into the bottom of it for hoses to run in so you don't feel them under the tape. What we did was we basically gave it a 16-degree flare on the bar and a 4-degree sweep. So flare being away from vertical with the drop, and then sweep being away from horizontal or in line with the top tube, for example, or with the top tube. So it gives you that opportunity to have that gravel style bar, on a nice hard performance shape. And so what it ends up being is the at the perches, we've got an extra centimeter on width. So 44 at the perches would be about 45, give or take. But then it's an additional 8 centimeters at the drop, at the tail drop as well. So you have lots more variability and stability in it as well. It's that same 80 millimeter reach, and it's about a 120, give or take, drop on it as well.
Like I've said to you in the past and other things we've been talking about, I would ride flared handlebars on every single bike. Love them. I'd ride, if I could, I would have every single bike with drop bars would have flared handlebars and GRX Di2 shifters on, because I really like the feel of riding on the drops on a flared bar. I like that it gives you a bit of extra width. And the GRX shifters, I just think, are the nicest, most ergonomic shifters I've ever used. So the fact that these are flared and also a little bit aero, I can't think of anything else quite like it. Maybe, MD's gravel bar, maybe. I'm not really sure. I still think it's a round tube though.
I think it's round.
Yeah, I don't think there's one with that like air. I can't think of any with the aero kind of top tube to them, which is that top bit being slightly wider and flatter is also really nice to sit on the top, and that's why I like aero bars as well. Yeah, really nice.
Yeah, one of the things that it's sort of funny this way. We do all this stuff. We really think through things we're doing, and these handlebars were really the stuff of handlebar geeks, right? Like, which is a dark little corner of the world, but it's real. There are those of us who care. And one of the little details that we did with the ABO4, which carries through all of our bar designs, that's a little bit different from what we see with some of the other aero bars that are on the market.
Yeah.
There's two things. One of them is that our airfoil is positioned ahead of the center line of the bar. And this is more pronounced on an ABO4, but you can still see it on this bar. So we move the airfoil in front of the bar, in front of the center line of the bar. And the reason for that was with those bars that have the airfoil shape as a trailing edge, you know, behind using the traditional point of the front of the bar as the leading edge, what happens is if you actually use the drops, you can hit your elbows or your wrists, you can hit your wrists on the foil itself, right?
Yeah.
And this is the considerations that, you know, we've gone through a number of evolutions and eras of road handle drop bar design. And a lot of them, if you step back and look at them, regardless of how trendy they were, you realize that they weren't really designed to be used on the drops.
Yeah.
You know, example for that is some of those bars that have the flat transition for your hands to set up, the ergo style bars. If you hold on to that ergo style, it's really difficult for 90% of the people to reach the lever blade. You know, which means you can't break on the drops. You have to kind of swirl your hand around and get it. Then you got to go back up to the tops. So, I mean, a good example is if you look at the Pro Peloton right now, you know, a lot of the bars that were in place a few years ago, guys are back to using, their spacers have come back and they're using the whole bar. And there's more and more sort of consistent round transitions or versions of that rounder transition, so that if you are using the drop yourself, you can actually reach the brakes.
Yeah,
also,
exactly.
You know, when you're sprinting, you got to get up under the perch, right? This kind of flat. You got to. There's things to do with your back muscles and whatnot that you can fire your back muscles if you roll your wrists forward a little bit. If you neutralize them, you know, in those sort of 45-degree angle bars, you don't have as much ability to sort of recruit muscle as you do on those kind of bars where you're forward. So the other thing we do is that airfoil shape is actually turned back a little bit. So it starts proud at the stem land, but then as it moves towards the transition in the bend towards the perch or to the reach, it actually tapers back in. And the reason for that is to do with the way your hands sit, because they sit like this, you know? And a lot of the aero bars on the market, they actually roll that airfoil shape out like this, which means that if you're sitting on the top, it pops your elbows. So you really kind of risk negating that aero performance because you got to kind of roll your arms back in a little bit. So by just taking that airfoil shape and rolling it this way, your elbows follow you and they come into your sides. So it's just a little ergo thing that actually just came from actually looking at the way the angle our hands are on when they're in front of us. And so it means that aero top shape is usable. You know, it's not just a performance metric. It's actually a usable place to put your hands. That makes sense.
It's incredibly practical, to be fair. Just logical.
Comfortable.
Yeah, completely agree.
You got to wonder if it's interesting. You're talking about the flared bars. You know, looking at a lot of we're hearing globally a demand for narrower bars at the high performance end. So lots and lots of, whereas we would usually ship the 44 bar on a 58 and 61 size. Out and clear that everyone's switching those out to 42s. Everyone's downsizing their bars. So maybe something like a flared bar is going to show up, you know, as a performance item. We see some of those riders in the Pro Peloton right now riding like 39s with a flare. So maybe we'll see that trend out.
You see, I saw a photo from, I don't know if you know the rider, he's called Dan Bigham, who races for Ribble, the Ribble team in the UK. And he's also, he is still an incredibly talented track pursuit rider, team pursuit rider, and has also, as I say, races for Team Ribble. He's been like a British champ on the track, and he also runs a company called What Shop. And there's a photo that I saw on him in like a race in Denmark, and he's on a prototype set of handlebars that What Shop had designed, and they literally look about, I don't know, less than 30 centimeters wide, but then flare out. And there's another guy, a Dutch guy, I think, who has a similar sort of style on the bike. He used to race for, I can't think who he races for now. Has a really, I can't remember his name. The same thing, tiny top end, but flares out at the bottom. And as interesting, I think it's very interesting. And we've seen those other bars, which a rider from Beat Cycling has been talking about riding, which have the like long top on them, which is allowing him to then get into a more aero position. And I like, it's super interesting. Innovation like that is interesting. It's good for it's good for cycling that people are trying to challenge in that. But I do question is how must make a bike handle must be interesting. But I mean, I personally, I think a flared. I used to have a set of Envy, the aero road bars, and on the drops they just felt great because they were slightly flared, just slightly flared. So like to me, like a flared bar on a road bike, I wouldn't even question it. I think it's great. It's a great idea, and I would put, I'd put these on my R5, which sounds quite funny when you say it.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah, and for me as well, like I mean, I generally would ride a 40 handlebar. I would say I wouldn't choose much wider than a 40, and that. I think for me, it's like when I go to a wider bar, I always feel like it feels a bit sluggish.
Right.
But
exactly right. Slows everything down.
Yeah, exactly. But then, I mean, something you and I have been talking about is putting 50 centimeter bars on a bike.
That's right.
Different story, that.
Yeah, that would be a hell of a thing.
That's 50 centimeter drop bars as well, not like a flat bar.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Premium. Include the upgrades. That was one of the taglines internally with the project. So any of the SRAM bikes come with power meters, whether it's Force or whether it's Red. More and more we're hearing about how people are using power and gravel. And again, as we alluded to a few minutes ago, as we see more people transition into cycling or back into cycling from spending COVID staring at a Zwift screen or riding a Peloton bike or whatever it was, all these kind of quantified through power metrics, they want that. They've learned, people have learned the importance or the power of having power. And so more and more those brands like Stages and Four Eyes and Quark and everyone are selling power meters to people who previously thought they didn't need it.
Price points are coming down on power meters. We've just seen Garmin have just released a new one, which is a mountain bike SPD power meter. SRM have done that as well. Universally prices are coming down on power meters because the market's competitive. So it's, I mean, to me, I think it's a good thing. It's good for people who train, but for you and I talked about it the other day, and I was saying like, it's great that people are using this as a metric and have learned to kind of understand it, but it doesn't get rid of the necessity for heart rate data. Like they're both really important to have together, but also there's nothing wrong with just going out and having fun on your bike and just ignoring it all. That's something that is really important as well.
Yeah. It's funny. I was having some conversations with gravel riders over the last little while, like phoning them and talking to the guys that are really committed to it. And one of the conversations we were having was about power and whether they use it or not. And one of the questions that came out of it was, I would ask, what's the difference between a ride and training?
Yeah.
And inevitably the answer was data.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
If I go for a ride with mates or with my partner, that's just going for a ride and having fun, because it's an opportunity to catch up and chat and chase downtown sprint signs with that kind of thing. And generally on those rides, I quite often put my bike computer in my pocket as well.
Right.
Just don't look at it, because that's the thing is like if it's in front of me, I'm going to start looking at it. Like I'm still recording the ride because it's so useful to have those metrics and to understand the data. But if I can't see it, I don't think about it, and it works quite well for me.
Yeah, but it is an interesting thing. I mean, because gravel is sort of quickly falling into the steady state athlete sport. I mean, you don't, maybe we'll see an evolution, or maybe it's the ultimate hybrid of steady state and I don't know what the opposite is. Variable speed, racing, group racing versus triathlon, for example, steady state versus variable speed. And so the training, protocols are very much tied to power in terms of, it sounds as though people are using it to manage their efforts, and then they can also, you can gauge your efforts in an event or gauge your efforts over a long gravel ride But then there's also the added benefit of being able to do the interval work that you need or understand what those, how to train with it. You know, it almost has, maybe the ultimate sweet spot is that, you know, is that gravel experience. Because on the road, it's like you train with gravel and then you can either keep up or you can't. And then in triathlon, it's like you park it where you know you need to be and just leave it there for, you know, however many hours you before. So, you know, yeah, it's interesting. So we're hearing more and more people running power and gravel.
Nice.
The other thing that we're really stoked about is this collaboration we had with Reserve Wheels. And you know, Reserve Wheel is the, it came out of Santa Cruz, and their mandate was to build really high performance, super strong wheels. So there's the famous Danny McCaskill video of him trying to destroy a Reserve Wheel.
Watch it. If you haven't seen it, make sure you see that video because it's brilliant.
It's pretty impressive. So we partnered with them. We worked specifically on the requirements for a gravel wheel. And so it's showing up now on all the Aspero 5s. It's this, it's called the 32. And it's a nice wide rim. It's a 24 millimeter internal rim. And they use, they've kind of landed on this semi-hookless bead. And what they're saying is, like, it means you can run any tire you want, basically. You can run a tubeless tire, you can run it with a tube, you can run a hookless bead tire. You know what? It manages them all really, really well. And it's that kind of variability that they strive for in their wheels. And then the cool thing is it's also backed by their no missed rides warranty. So if you do destroy it, you know, you get a new one, you know, I think even before you send the other one back. Like it isn't open to a warranty assessment per se before you receive a replacement. They get you some wheels. Weight wise, pretty good. 1,500 grams with a 240 hub in them. Pretty good size. That's pretty good for a set of gravel wheels for sure.
Wheels, that's good. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then the other thing, just kind of round out the premium aspect. You know, everything comes with a nice short, flat dimension saddle from Prologo. You know, these sort of trend towards having a shorter, wider, with a cutout kind of saddle. Now, the one saddle is not for everyone. We're well aware of that, but these are becoming increasingly more popular, regardless of the brand, whether it's Cell Italia or Pro, or this dimension saddle from Prologo seems to be making a lot more sense to people than fighting with a curved or a semi-curved or a, you know, flat or, you know, chameleon or whatever you want to call them saddle. More people are finding a home on these shorter, wider, flatter saddles. And then also we're including the Gravel King SK tire on it. So this is the actual aftermarket Gravel King, super fast, high performance tire. It reads 38. They call it 38C, but in the actual, what we call the ETRTO, the actual measurement of the tire, it's called that as a 40. So it does sit in that 715 OD tire world that we were talking about way up there when we were talking about trail. So the nice thing is this tire is it is beautiful to ride, and something that Cervélo as a brand has always been tuned into, and probably every PM from a high performance company knows, like if you provide a bike with good tires, you feel it at the test ride. You know, it's a performance advantage to have good rubber. You know, there's no reason not to, you know, except that, you know, we've had incidences where we supplied really high-end tires on R5s and whatnot, and people were puncturing on test rides.
Yeah.
And then that store's not, you know, like it's kind of a give or take. But obviously a gravel tire is not as susceptible to as a super lightweight open tubular. But anyway, beautiful tire. So you get that performance advantage out of the gate.
It's nice to see that as you said, the finishing components, the tires and saddle are good quality stuff. And I mean, it's probably like, I don't know, 5 years ago, every brand was coming with a saddle that the first thing you do is take it off and replace it straight away. And now it feels like brands are sort of, especially Cervélo and other bike brands as well, kind of understanding that you need to go for something that's a bit more all round as opposed to going for the cheapest saddle you can purchase at bulk, basically. And I've not used a Prologo Dimension, but it's very similar to the saddle I do use, which is the Pro Stealth. And you know, it's a saddle that has proven to become very popular for a large portion of people. I think every brand is doing something similar. You know, there's Specialized are doing something, Bontrager are doing something very similar. Everyone's doing something that's slightly shorter nose and slightly wider. And as you say, it works for a large portion of people, but isn't always the perfect saddle, obviously. Everyone's asses are different.
Yeah, for sure. And, but the truth is that often, when you're looking at opportunities, we're talking about an Aspero 5 being premium, bringing premium to the gravel world. And all these touches matter, and there's nothing worse. So the saddle thing is an interesting conundrum. You either give people a fighting chance and find a really high-end, effective saddle like we've done with this, or the flip side is, or you just basically put something on that people can throw in the garbage because it's not worth having. But fortunately, often you look around, and in my mind, the saddle discussion still isn't as open as it should be. There's people, especially coming new to the sport, who buy a used bike maybe, or they're just going in and buying something off the floor, and nobody's had the really open discussion with them about how uncomfortable they should be, or or how comfortable they're allowed to be, when they find the right saddle on a bike. They're worried about the fact that they've asked this guy for 5,000 pounds for a bike, and now they're going to say, but I got to tell you, like, if you don't like that seat, then we should be talking about upgrading, and so you often see people out there that are just sucking it up and riding a terrible, terrible seat for them. And you can see the way they sit on their bike that it's no good.
Yeah.
It's a roll back, or they're standing all the time, or they have to sit up, or there's a million different sort of indicators that it's the wrong saddle. But nobody ever said, okay, let's have a really personal discussion right now.
It's one of those things that I won't name the brand, but there was a particular brand that was very commonly spec'd on bikes, and a particular saddle that they did. And I remember a bike I used to own. I always used to think that these particular saddles were very beautiful looking, but my God, I couldn't ride more than maybe an hour on one. It just used to destroy me. And unfortunately, I know that brand has now done a lot of work in producing newer saddles. I won't go near it now because of that experience I had with it 5 or so years ago. I wouldn't ever purchase anything from that brand, unfortunately. But you're right, especially newer cyclists, people who are buying their first road bike, you can almost guarantee that 9 times out of 10, that saddle that comes with that bike is going to be a shite saddle. And it's going to you're going to need to change that. And it's a very confusing thing for so many people because there's so many brands and so many options out there. And I get asked it a lot. I get asked what saddle I ride, tons. And I'm always like, this is what I ride, but everyone's different. There's always that asterisk, but everyone's different. This saddle has worked for me in the past. This saddle didn't work for me in the past. My biggest advice on saddles is literally go and talk to a bike fitter, and because they will have a large selection of saddles which you can try out of various different brands. Like I previously, before I was using the Pro Stealth, ironically, the first time I sat on the Stealth, I didn't like it. But I think it was because it was so different to what I'd sat on before. Before the Stealth, I was using a Specialized Ronin, and that was because everyone said, "Oh, it's a good saddle; it kind of works." But before that, I was using anything and everything under the sun because I wasn't really sure what worked for me. And the only reason I eventually, came to the Stealth, and then, I tried the Bontrager version of it, which is very, very similar. I can't remember what that one's called. And I was like, oh, I'll go for the Stealth. Same with TT saddles. That has been a continual thing for me for about 4 years of trying different saddles out. And the saddle I've settled on now for my time trial bike is from a company called Dash.
Oh yeah, those are slick.
I really struggled. Yeah, it's a beautiful looking saddle. They're all handmade, bloody expensive, and they don't sell them in the UK anywhere, so you have to pay import duty and everything on them. But I contacted them and sort of asked them a few questions. I asked a few friends of mine who are time trialists on their opinion as well, who actually do use the Dash as well. And the reason why I changed saddles, like I tried ISM saddles, and I always found they used to rub on my thighs really badly, but kind of fitted right. And then the Pro one, which I think it's called the Aero Fuel, was like for short TTs, perfect. Long TTs, not good. So it is just the best thing you can do, honestly, is reach out to as many different sources of information on that you know, whether it's, as I say, for time trialing, experts in those kind of fields, other people that do the same sort of races, or if you're road cycling or gravel riding, get to a bike fitter and just talk to a bike fitter about it. Most saddle brands do a really good returns policy as well if it doesn't quite work for you.
They all have a really good return policy now. The trend in the industry really is about making sure that people are comfortable on their bike. And that was something that, you know, I've laughed about this before. I think, you know, when I'm old enough that when I got into the sport, there's basically like an old English guy that said, you know, put your bars as low as you can go and get used to the seat. Like that was the science in bike fit.
Yeah.
And, you know, now, thank God, the reason people are riding road bikes in the kind of volumes that they weren't 20 years ago is because we started thinking about fit, right? And a big part of that is saddle. And you really see the growth in women's sport, which is probably attributable almost 100% to that.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Completely agree.
And I think good fitters, like professional fitters who've been in the business for a while, are probably able to say, well, you know, based on the way you're sitting on your bike or the, you know, whatever it is, I think you might want to try this one first and see what you think. And then there's like a really nice open conversation that comes back when you come back and say, not this one. And they say, tell me about where it hurts, you know, and you have polite conversation about parts that you've probably never spoken to your bike guy about. And they try this one, you know, like, I think we've opened up that dialogue now in a way that hasn't been there previously.
It's 100% a good thing, completely a good thing.
Yeah.
There's still work to do, but we're getting better and better, definitely.
Yeah, we're getting there. All right, what else is going on in this? Oh, the model line. Should we walk through this stuff here?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple, really. There's three variations. It's pretty simple. They're all electronic, or you can buy the frame set.
Yeah, so the way this is going to happen is that our goal, MY22 is a fairly broad, because of COVID and the rollout and supply chain constraints and all these things that are happening globally. The Aspero 5 is a platform that will launch at the premium level and maintain that same spec as we roll through. What we're hoping can change as the constraints lift off supply is that we're aiming for this model where the right bike for the right rider. So maybe, you know, previously, if you wanted the purple one, maybe it only came in Altegra, but you wanted the red group and it was only available in black, you know. So we're trying to get to the point where there's a much broader offering, color and group set. Now, obviously, that's not going to line up every time based on constraints that are just inherent globally right now, which is a giant pain. And we've had to be perfectly honest, we've had to pivot a couple of times based on what we could get. You know, we might have forecasted all of these bikes in this color with this group set and found out we couldn't get the group set. You know, we couldn't get enough of those frames. So the model line is poised to offer basically almost every model in every color. And that will come into being as the coming months progress. So, but basically, you're going to get red option, you get 815 Di2 options from Shimano, the GRX stuff, and Force as well, 1x and 2x. They all come with the reserve wheels. 3 different colors though. So this one is what we call 5 black that you're seeing right now. Oh, let's start with lime. We'll start here. These kind of premium paint finishes showed up in the system as well, which is really cool. Building on what we've been playing with a bit previously, the idea is that we want these bikes to kind of live together in a way so they make sense as a family to a certain degree, but they're a little bit different than what else is out there and maybe what we've done before, but really give people an opportunity to have something that's pretty special. So the first bike is this lime shimmer color, and it kind of transitions, as you can see in this image, from this kind of green to gold. It moves, you know, these beautiful layers of paint. And then inside the fork leg and the rear chainstays is this pattern of, we took the accent off the E and sort of manipulated it into a pattern. The nice thing is on a lot of these bikes, it becomes this kind of nice shimmery kind of look, much like you'd get from the leaves on a tree, for example. You know, so a very sort of organic, although flashy, oddly organic kind of paint color in this lime shimmer. It's really quite beautiful when you see it in person.
Mm. And I think, it's been very noticeable with Cervélo how I would say since the Áspero was launched, the colorways have really, the colors of the bikes available have really upped their game.
Absolutely.
And from the, the first colors of the Áspero, which was like a red, the green that I've got, and what was the other one? There was another color that came out first.
A gold, a tan kind of gold.
Yeah, and then the next iteration was like the red carbon, the black with the gold, and then the sort of grey and the blue. And then you look at the colorways that came out for the Caledonia as well. The purple Caledonia and the chameleon-y one are, and the navy blue one, in fact, the three of them, to me, I'm just like, they look amazing. They look so good. And the more I've seen the like silver one, the more I've liked that one as well.
Yeah.
And seeing these kind of colorways now coming out for the Áspero 5, it just shows the sort of advancements as well.
Yeah, for sure. So as I said, they're based on some, practice versus reality. The Lime Shimmer launches as a red bike only. So that's one of the few that isn't sort of really padded out right now. And that was really just tied to what the opportunities were for us to get this bike to market. But the other thing I'll point out too with the paint on the Asperos and these paint jobs is really minimal graphics on it. And the reason for that was they decided that there's so much nice industrial design work on these bikes. It's so, like, the curves are beautiful. They make sense. They're clean. So why cover it in sort of gaudy graphics? So that was the idea with the kind of really clean approach to the graphics as well. Really aesthetics, really crisp. So the other color is this purple sunset, which again is a sort of chameleon style color. It changes, and it's this gold through purple and gold as it passes by. And again, that same kind of sort of metallic or shiny graphic appears on the fork leg and on the inside of the chain stays as well.
I love this one. I love it. Yeah, so cool.
So that bike shows up as a GRX bike and as a forced bike. And then finally, the black. As I said before, black still is, if you introduce a black bike, it's going to be 80% of your sales for obvious reasons. But what we've seen the opportunity to do with what we call the 5 black is that it's really an ultralight paint job. It's a technical finish. So, we put this work into building light bikes and then potentially put 80 or 90 grams worth of paint on, depending on them. Bikes. 5 black is always our opportunity to have the lowest weight paint job that's available to us on this bike. So it's a satin black, and it's just very lightweight. And then those accents show up as kind of like a mother of pearl or nacreous finish.
And it's the same with the Cervélo logos on the frame, isn't it?
Correct.
Really smart. Really cool.
Yeah, so the goal is that sort of will only be a 5-level indication. So not sort of over the top ostentatious stuff saying, hey, I've got to, except other than the fact that it's a chameleon style paint job, but then just a little touch internally that says, here's the detail in the graphic. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And again, that one's a Forster GRX bike. Yeah, so that is the walkthrough Áspero 5. So it really is us sort of taking advantage of the fact that there's a huge growth in the market right now and a need for a bike that's a premium level gravel bike. People are looking for that growth in performance and something that they're far more committed to than they were maybe 5-6 years ago. And so this is why we come now with this Áspero 5, is to just deliver that super premium gravel experience into the market.
Amazing. As always, Phil, you talk so eloquently and so well through everything. And you and I could talk for hours. We do talk for hours. There's no good talk. We do talk for hours. And I really appreciate you taking some time, shall I say, out of your day now afternoon.
Yeah, we're 12:30 and it's 10 degrees. So maybe there might be a lunch ride.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking your time out to talk through what I'm incredibly excited about this bike and to talk through it to everyone else that's listening. And yeah, and this is going to be live the day that the bike goes live. So make sure you go check it out online. I'm sure there's going to be tons of information going out about it across everywhere because it's flipping cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, and I think, you and I, you're right. You and I have talked about it, extensively, as we have. The anticipation has been overwhelming at times, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking about it for months, it feels like.
Exactly.
In fact, it is months. It literally is months. I remember at some point we had a conversation and you shunned away quite quickly what we were talking about because of this bike. And I think that was before I officially was aware of it. But yeah, it's I'd say I can't wait to get my hands on one as soon as I do, which I hopefully will be soon. I'll be sure to shout high and low about it in every single way, shape, and form that I can, because it's an awesome looking bit of kit.
Right on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for the time. It's always, I mean, as you say, we chat endlessly. Sometimes we just record it.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat. It's always good. It's fun.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.